Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. For today's video, we are going to be doing a little bit of a myth busting type video. I'm not sure if it's myth busting or if it's really replying to the comments or if it's going to be debunking a dishonest comment or dishonest meme that I see about police officers all of the time. And this has to do with the amount of training that police officers go through. It's one of those things that they post and they try to use it to shut you down. And if you tell them that what they're doing is dishonest, they ask you to explain it. If you don't have time to explain it, they just say, "I win. I'm the best keyboard warrior of all time." And the meme that we're going to be talking about today is going to be this one. You'll either see this comment or this meme posted in this manner or any kind of slight variations of it. And that's the one where it says what does it say? Barber school length is 1,500 hours. Police academy length is 840 hours. Let that sink in. What they're trying to say is that it takes more training to become a barber, to learn how to cut hair, something that's very innocuous and not dangerous and not life-threatening. They're going to say, those guys receive more training than a police officer receives. Therefore, police officers don't receive enough training, and it's dangerous. They're a liability. They shouldn't be out on the street. That's the kind of stuff that they're saying. And they're like, we need to reform the police departments. We need to give them 4 times more training. If they get 4 times more training, they'll be 4 times more gooder police officers. The problem with that is it's dishonest on a variety of fronts, and it's just not accurate, and it doesn't fit into that mold. And the reason they use it is because it's not like a quick one-liner that I can just reply with and say, that's not true. Police officers receive 14 million hours of training. It's not something that you can just easily reply with like a quip. It's something that requires a long, drawn-out, intelligent response. And most people don't have the time to do that kind of stuff on social media or the energy to spend on someone that's as stupid as the people that are posting that kind of meme. But today, in the form of a video, and I'm going to try to keep it under 15 or 20 minutes today, I'm going to do my best to explain that to you. And one of the things that I came up with the other day that just kind of popped into my head and I threw it up on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter and everywhere was this idea right here. And I'm relatively proud of this. And I think it's a very fitting response to that particular meme. And that's something that I said, police officers are not made in the academy. They're made on the street. The academy is simply the second step of the process. And, the people that would post the original meme about training hours, these are the type of people that think that every job exists in academia. That every job that you're doing, if you go to school, you should just go to school for it. And then when you get done with school, you're qualified to do that job. A police officer is not one of those jobs for a variety of reasons. And I think that there are, maybe you can say there's 2 phases to becoming a police officer. The first phase to becoming a police officer is everything that you do prior to entering the academy. That stuff is like what you've done with your entire life and the background and application process to starting the academy. The academy, you can think of it almost like a qualification course to prove that you're qualified to become a police officer. And then you hit the street, and that's where your real training begins. It's one of those jobs that it's more like an apprenticeship for a number of years without like a defined apprenticeship period. But it's one of those jobs that, really you're preparing your whole life to do. It's not something that you just learn in the academy. And I have some examples of people, and I'm not going to like be putting people out on blast or stuff like that, but I do see a lot of comments from people saying, it should require a 4-year degree to become a police officer. Or, that's what they do in Europe and yada, yada, yada. The response I have to that kind of stuff is, we don't require a 4-year degree to become a police officer. I happen to have a 4-year degree. It's not in criminal justice. My degree is in economics. I became a police officer with a lot of real world experience prior to becoming a police officer. Most of the police officers I know that are good police officers came to the job with a lot of real world experience that had nothing to do with law enforcement. I've also seen people who wanted to be a police officer, went to college for criminal justice, got hired on with the police department, went through the academy, did fine. And then once they hit the street, they were horrible. And it's really sad when you see one of those people that thought they were dedicating their whole life to becoming a police officer. And then once they hit the street, they found out that they actually weren't qualified for the job. Those kind of situations are really sad, but it's also important that we do weed out those people for reasons, right? We all know that someone that went to college and took a bunch of courses but hits the street and isn't prepared for the job, it's important that we weed out those people. Now, what does it take to become a police officer, or what is a good police officer? You know, what are the attributes of a good police officer? And there's a couple of things, you know, like having the ability to talk to people and work with people. And communicate with people and convince people onto your side. Like I can't think of the being persuasive. Being a good communicator and a persuasive person are incredibly important attributes of a good police officer. But I think some of the most important attributes of a good police officer are someone that is intelligent, can think on their feet, and can deal with dynamic, evolving, quickly changing situations. Those are the tests that can tell, you know, whether or not a police officer is actually going to be a good police officer. That's what separates the people that are just walking around with a badge and a gun versus actual good police officers. And we've seen those people that are unable to perform in a quickly moving, high tempo, high evolving, high pressure situation. Those are the officers that discharge their firearm when they shouldn't be discharging a firearm. You've got the Kim Potter incident where she drew her taser rather than her firearm. We've all seen officers that freak out under pressure, use excessive force, start screaming, and, you know, just make absolute fools of themselves. Those are the people that were not prepared for the job. And those are the things that are the most difficult, if not impossible, to train into people. So that's one of the reasons why I say the police academy is actually a qualification course. Now, what does it take to get hired as a police officer? You know, the same people that post, I'll bring it back up here. The same people that will post this meme are the same people that say all you have to have is a GED and 6 months in the academy and you get to become a police officer. That's a pretty dishonest thing to say as well, because there's a lot more that goes into getting hired as a police officer. If that was true, then it wouldn't be as difficult to find good candidates. You know, when I applied for the job to become a police officer, they instantly ran my background. They run your background, make sure you don't have any warrants, make sure you don't have any felonies, like legitimately right away. And they also make sure you have a valid driver's license. So I had to have my high school degree and all that, but I also had to have a relatively clean record just for the ability to go and take the test. I then went and took the test, and the test was a 3-part test. One part of the test was a multiple choice portion of the test, and I don't remember what the multiple choice questions were about. I think it was actually like you had to read a big section, and then they would take that away from you. You had a certain amount of time, like 30 minutes. You had 30 minutes to read a couple pages of a booklet. And in those couple pages was a scenario. You had to read the scenario. They would take that booklet away from you. They would then give you the answer sheet, and you had to read the questions and answer questions about what you just read. It's like a reading comprehension, but not just reading comprehension, but they wanted to make sure that you were picking out details that a police officer would need to be able to pick out. The next part of the test was we watched a video and we had to write a police report based on what we saw in that video with no experience. So I don't quite remember the video scenario, what I saw, but they try to make it something that's complex but not complicated, so that there's a lot of details and stuff, and that gives them the ability to kind of weed people out that would make good police officers and not make good police officers. You need to write down what you would think would be necessary in a police report, so you need to put in sufficient detail without being too wordy, but also you need to not be too brief. Then there was also a section where we had to watch videos, and in real time we had a video camera on us. We had to watch video scenarios, and we had to respond to them as if we were a police officer in that situation. I remember one of the scenarios that I saw on the video portion of the test was, it shows like a police cruiser driving up the scene, getting out. There's already an officer standing there, and the officer says, "Hey, I can hear him screaming inside. Let's go." And then they kind of wave you in. The door opens, and you've got a guy. I can't remember. There was definitely a suicidal subject standing there holding a firearm, and you had to talk to him, negotiate it with him, whatever. There was another one where I think he was holding like a woman kind of hostage, not necessarily hostage, but like a domestic violence kind of situation where the dude's staring at you and you can see the woman had like a big black eye, and the guy's like, "You need to get out of my house. You don't have the right to be here." And, you had to kind of negotiate your way through that scenario, and the video doesn't respond to you. It just sits there. But you had to pretend you're a police officer. And then I had another one where it said that you responded to a break-in at a retail store in the early morning hours before any employees were on scene. And it showed a police officer taking merchandise and putting it in his pocket. And, I had to, excuse me, I'm dealing with a little bit of a cold. I had to pretend I was a police officer and talk to the other officer the way I would talk if I was a real police officer. You go and you take all these tests, and then you're graded. You're graded, and then you're ranked. I was fortunate enough that I scored very highly on the test. I was in the 90th percentile. So when you're in the 90th percentile, the first couple of things that you do, one of the first things that you do is you go and you take a PT test, a physical fitness test. The first physical fitness test was very easy. It's like the first, like round one of the eliminations. I don't remember what it was specifically, but it was push-ups, sit-ups, and a short run. The run was like in the gymnasium, and it might have been 3 laps around the gym. I can't remember, and you had a specific time. It was incredibly easy. The push-ups, I think it might have even been half the standard. So it was like 15 push-ups, 15 sit-ups, and a minute and 10 seconds to do the run. And I remember going in thinking, this is a piece of cake. This is a joke. Why are they even making me do this? And then I got in there, and there was a lot of people that couldn't even do that. They couldn't do 15 push-ups and 15 sit-ups. They couldn't do the run that amount of time. They were tripping all over themselves. That was the first part of the weed out process. That's what these police application processes are meant to do. They're meant to weed out the bad candidates, so hopefully you only have good candidates left. Then I got my background packet. It was incredibly extensive. They ask you questions going back at least 10 years. At the time, I was about 30 years old, so it was going back to the time I was about 20 years old. I had to list every single employer, had to come up with references from every single place I've ever worked, and just answer all kinds of questions about my background and potential criminal history. And they're asking you questions that would have been indications of criminal activity and a lot of that stuff. And you have to make sure you answer consistently and truthfully. And, it's a relatively stressful process. My biggest fear at the time was not that I wasn't qualified, but I was going to make a mistake on my background, and that was going to make it look like I was lying, and they were going to kick me out of the process. So you fill all that out. Then you go in for your background interview. They go through your entire background. They ask you questions about it. If there's holes in it or questions about it or things that just don't quite look right, they're going to pick your brain about it. They're going to put some pressure on you, try to figure out if you're lying. They're going to go through your criminal history. There's certain things in your criminal history that even though you've made it this far, are going to knock you out. People get knocked out just during the background interview. You go through the background interview, then you go to polygraph. The polygraph, again, they take your whole background questionnaire. They go through it. They pick things out that are going to trigger people that have these different backgrounds, and they try to trigger you. They try to get you excited. They try to get you to lie, or they try to get you to tell the truth about something you've been lying about. That's actually the real benefit to the polygraph is you're strapped down and you're under the assumption that they can tell when you're lying. So if you say something and their little machine gets a little wiggle and they start to dial in, I've seen some videos of it, of police applicants actually admitting to various serious crimes like rape and stuff like that, or felonious assaults, or even like child pornography and theft. And, there's all kinds of stuff that these people will admit to because they think that the polygraph knows. So you go through all of that. Then you go through a more extensive physical fitness test. You go through a deeper physical. And my first physical, it was kind of dumb. They couldn't get the chest x-ray to focus. So it came out blurry, and they said I had an enlarged heart and I had to go get an echocardiogram in order to get back in the process. This is a lot more than simply having a high school diploma or a GED. Then I had to go take a VO2 max test. This is a test where they put a hose in your mouth and they plug your nose, and you're on a treadmill. It's on a steep incline, and every 3 minutes it starts going faster and the incline gets steeper, and you just go till you can't possibly go anymore. They're testing your aerobic physical conditioning. You have to be in really good shape to do this. In order to make it through this entire process, you have to have a lot of skin in the game, and it's difficult to lie your way through or fake your way through. That's what the process is about. When I went through, my background investigator came to my house, wanted to look at my house, wanted to talk to my wife, made me take my dog for a walk because he wanted to talk to my wife by himself, to make sure that I wasn't pressuring her to say things, and the background investigator that I had was actually on a temp assignment, and his main job, his regular everyday 9-to-5 job as a police officer, was a sexual assault investigator. So I had a detective that's used to interrogating sexual assault suspects, talking to my wife, trying to decide if I was a good person or not, if I have violent tendencies, if I had any domestic violence that had not yet been revealed. Like, these are all things that you go through in the application process. And then it has to go to like a review board, and the safety director reviews everything, and they decide whether or not to offer you a seat in the academy. I have a couple of friends that I know personally. Oh, and then we also had to go to an oral board where it's actually a group of 3 officers, and you sit in front of them. They're looking at your background and criminal history and everything that you filled out, and they're trying to find things that are going to trigger you. They're going to question you very aggressively. It kind of simulates being a witness testifying in court, is the best way that I can kind of describe it. They try to get under your skin and make you question your knowledge, question your answers. They try to get an emotional response out of you to make sure that you have the fortitude to become a police officer and do the things that you do. You have to go through all of that just to get into the academy. That does not happen for barber school. If you want to get into barber school, I'm pretty sure you just get a student loan and you go to barber school. If you give them your money, they're going to train you. It's not the same. So you show up to the job with a tremendous amount of qualifications for that job. You then go to the academy, and I'll pull this back up. And like I said, the academy is really just the second step of the application process. The academy is something that I compare to a qualifications course. They're putting you through this course to make sure that you actually are qualified to do the job that you said you're qualified for. And the academy is actually a weed out process as well. There's a lot of people that get in the academy and can't handle the stress, can't handle the running. Turns out they weren't actually in the shape they were. When I went through, we still did physical boxing. My nose got busted a couple times in the academy. My nose bled for weeks. Every time you just barely touched my nose, it would start bleeding because it never properly healed. You go through ground fighting, and then you go through all of your other defensive tactics. You go through your weapons training and all of that stuff. Then you go through driving. You'd be amazed how many people fail the academy because they can't pass the driving courses. These are all continued weed out phases. Then if and then when you are in the academy, of course, there's training about law, there's training about Constitution and all that other stuff. But one thing that I kind of want to remind everybody is that you don't need to have like a 4-year law degree to become a police officer. You just have to have a better than average understanding of the law. You have to have a very solid understanding of the law and a very solid understanding of the Constitution and the Fourth Amendment and things like that, because the Fourth Amendment and then your local law are probably the 2 most important things that you deal with as a police officer. But you also have to remember that if you're going to apply for the job as a police officer, you're probably already going to have a decent grasp on those things. And I would also say that every citizen should have a pretty decent grasp on the law. Like, you don't need a 4-hour class on what the proper speed limit is, or how to use a turn signal, or stop at a stop sign, all the different traffic codes. You don't need to have a ton of training on what a parking violation is, what's not a parking violation. All of that stuff is literally right there written on your ticket book. It doesn't require a lot of training. A fundamental knowledge of the Constitution is something that you should already possess before you go into the academy. Every citizen of the United States should have a fundamental understanding of the Constitution. With that, you just need a little bit of additional information. Our legal training in the academy was probably of 6 months. I don't know, a month in total, which is actually quite a bit. When you're there for 8 hours a day, there's only so much that you can teach people that they're actually going to retain while they're sitting in their desk trying to remember this information. The big part of it is the application of that. Now, when we're in the academy, we do go through like scenario training and stuff, but it's not the same. You cannot simulate real life in a training scenario for police officers. At least I would say that a training scenario is only about 50% realistic. There's a level of unpredictability that you find in the real world that you simply cannot replicate in the academy. Now, if you're a barber, you can cut cadaver. Like, I know that they can cut hair of dead people and prepare them for funerals. They put wigs up on things and they cut wigs. A lot of that stuff. But then also, and I'll go back to that, one of the reasons this is also an unfair comparison is because they're comparing this to a cosmetology degree, which is not just a barber. In order to be a barber, you just have to know how to cut a couple of dudes' hairs. And there's only like 5 different haircuts that you need to learn in reality. But you still have to go to cosmetology school, and then they make you learn about skincare and nails and all this other stuff that is not actually applicable to the job. One of the reasons for that, in my opinion, is because state boards are influenced by money, and they're trying to encourage people to go to these schools. These schools cost upwards of $20,000. There's a little bit of a financial incentive there. They're kind of paying back their friends. They're greasing the wheel, so to speak. That doesn't happen in the police academy. There's not a lot of incentive to make the academy longer. Because it actually would cost money, and the return on that investment would be relatively small. One thing that we've seen recently with the academies is that they've added additional training hours to the academy that were, arbitrary. And then you have academies looking for extra fluff to kind of stick in there. For instance, my academy is doing training that you typically wouldn't get until you were already an officer with 3 or 4 years. They're doing that in the academy now. So guys are getting training that they have absolutely no idea how to incorporate into their day-to-day life because they don't have the experience to understand how that works. But regardless, you go through all of that stuff and then you graduate from the academy. You graduate from the academy and you start field training. There are a lot of people that we find that met all of the qualifications, had a good background, went to the academy, and then the day they set foot out on the street on field training, they're horrible. They don't know what they're doing. They're soup sandwich. Basically from day one, we know that they're going to get terminated. It's just a matter of letting them fail enough times that we can justify terminating them from their position. If this was a job that you required people to have a 4 years of training, and like the way it would work in the United States would, because of the way you have to get police officers, I think that, and I've heard that this happens in some places in Europe as well, that you'd have to hire these guys and then send them to training for 4 years, and then they would get to go work the street. It would be a tremendous waste of time, energy, and resources to send people to college for 4 years and then have them come back, hit the street, and you find out that they're not an effective police officer. The best thing to do is find that out as soon as possible. And the only way that you can find that out is in the street. I mean, you're going to weed people out of the academy, but there's still people that finished the academy, and the minute that they hit the street on field training, we realized that they are not equipped for the job. That's where we get into the first sentence that I said in this meme, is that police officers are not made in the academy, they're made on the street. The academy, so you have the hiring and background process. That is phase 1 of the hiring process, in my opinion. Phase 2 of the hiring process is the academy. If these people can survive the academy, then at least they've made it further than most people would. Now they're out on the street, and this is where you really learn how to become a police officer. The field training phase is a phase where you're continued to evaluate, and if you're not cutting it, you're cut at that point in time. If you make it through all of that stuff, then you're officially a police officer, and that's where you really start to learn how to do the job. In my opinion, it takes solid 5 years on the street as a police officer before you're a real competent police officer. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that. I realize how long this video is getting, so I'm going to be quick. But I remember being a brand new police officer, coming out of the academy thinking I knew everything, starting in field training, realizing I didn't actually know anything, and then getting through all of that and making it to the street as an officer driving a car by myself for the first time, realizing, oh my gosh, there's a lot to this that I still have to learn. The way I learned how to do that was I'd get dispatched on a call with a senior officer. I would show up and I would let them take the lead. I would basically follow their lead, and I'd go on multiple different calls with multiple different senior officers. I'd pick up a little bit from every single one, and I would incorporate that into my repertoire. Another thing that would happen was I was, as a new officer, get dispatched on a call for service. Whether it's complicated or not complicated, the senior officers would find their way to my call. They would start observing me, start watching what I was doing. If I wasn't doing the right thing, they would step in and start doing the right thing. They would correct me, or they would just jump in and start handling things because I was potentially in a dangerous situation. I remember as an officer with less than a year on the department, there was a fight going on between two houses that were 2 streets apart. We'd get a call at this house. By the time we got there, the people had all gone home. We'd go over to that house, and then the people would go back over there. And every time we left, it was just chaos. And one time I left the one house and I was driving to another call, and I came across the original group, and it was a group of people with baseball bats that had just threatened people over at this other house. So I aired my location, and I get out and I tell them, hey, you guys need to stop. Like, we're tired of dealing with this stuff. You're going to stop and talk to me. And they got loud and boisterous, and they were drunk. And this one guy had a baseball bat. I told him to drop the baseball bat, and he's like, what are you going to do? You going to kill me? And he calls me like a pussy or something like that. Throws the baseball bat on the ground, is approaching me. He doesn't have a shirt on. And I've got this large crowd of people, one person directly in front of me that's threatening to fight me. And my concern was, if I go hands-on with this guy, all of his friends are going to jump on my back and start beating me. So I did what I think a lot of new police officers do, and a lot of civilians would think would be the right call. I drew my taser, and I turned on the light, turned on the laser, put it on him. I was like, dude, you need to back up. You need to get down on the ground, put your hands in the air, all this other stuff. He was completely unfazed by my taser. He continued to, he didn't keep walking at me. He stood at 4 or 5 feet away, just yelling and screaming at me and all these other things. Finally, another group of officers came. They jumped out of the cars. They ran over. They put him on the ground, put him in handcuffs. I learned the appropriate way to handle some of these situations. I experienced that a couple of times, and then it started to click with me. When is the appropriate time to put hands on people? When is it maybe when you see that group of people, especially now as a seasoned officer, if I saw that group of people, I'd probably stay in my car and stay at a pretty safe distance and watch them. And I'd get on the air and I'd say, hey, this is 190. I've got this group of people at the corner of Stop and Go. Start me a couple more cars, and then we'll approach. These are things that, as a new officer, you think you just need to jump in there and solve the problem right away. And that's how you get yourself into dangerous situations. So I had a lot of stuff like that. Then when I finally had some seniority and some experience on the street, I became that senior officer, where when a new officer was dispatched on a call for service, I would hear them get dispatched on it, and I listened to them like, you know what, that sounds complicated. I don't think they're going to know exactly what to do, so I'm going to go help them. Often I would get there at the same time as them. As we were walking up to the house, I'd walk in front of them, knock on the door myself, basically handle the entire call by myself, and then say goodnight. They'd shut the door or whatever it was. As we're walking back to the cars, I would turn to these guys and say, hey, you saw how I did that, right? Like, you understand this is the appropriate way to handle these calls. And often you see that light bulb go on above their head, and then they began to learn from me. The moral of the story with this whole thing is that this is not a job that you learn how to do in a classroom. This is a job that you come to with a certain mindset and a certain number of skills. You gain a little bit of knowledge in the academy that is kind of compressed. And then when you get out on the street, you take all of this knowledge that's all compressed from the academy, and you start to let it expand like a sponge. And, you know, as that sponge starts to expand, you start to realize, oh, that's what that training meant. Without the experience, all that knowledge doesn't mean anything. The job of a police officer is not one that you learn how to do in the classroom. You learn a little bit in the classroom, then you apply that over time. That's the reason that this particular meme is dishonest. It does not describe what it takes to become a police officer. I just wasted 31 and a half minutes of your time trying to explain. And that's the reason why when I see this stuff posted on Facebook in the comments or whatever, I generally don't reply to it, because it's way more complicated than just that. So I'm done yammering. Thank you for watching. I'll talk to you guys later.